Hello, I'm Chris Aino Pihlak, and I'm joined by the femme, the myth, the legend, Florence Ashley, or maybe I should be saying Florence Ashley Perry, Pat. Uh,
Florence Ashley is good.
mhm,
Plus,
to
nobody
talk.
knows. Plus, nobody knows how to pronounce my last name, which is why I don't use it.
Mhm. Well, you talk no girl with last name Pihlak.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
So
see,
we're here.
I grew up with my dad getting called Pear, and I was like, I don't want to deal with that. So yeah.
Mhm. But yeah,
Also,
we're
nobody
here to
knows how
talk.
to do the R, and like people are like French R. What's that?
What is the French R? That's the first question of this.
It's a roll at the back of the mouth R. So it's like paré. Um,
Mm.
Like it can be more subtle, but like yeah, it's like Paris, not parade. Like we don't do the
Oh.
r. Like it's not a r, it's a r.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love it.
A little bit like it's less pronounced than the Spanish rolled
Mhm.
R. But yeah. But it's
Yeah.
like it's a rolled R. And then the E with an accent is very different sound than the E without accent. Because it's A instead of uh.
Mm.
So it's more of like it's like when you say the letter A in English, but we also have E. So we have E. So we have like three sounds that go with the E, depending on which accent you put on it.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because I know some things. I took grade 10 French in Ontario, that the direction of the slash.
Yep, yep. And then just to confuse you, there's also uh,
Hmm.
there's the like accent circonflexe is what we call it, but there's it's like a little inverted V, and that one's the same one as like the backwards one. So I guess depending on how my picture is mirrored, it's not going to be helpful. But
Yeah.
from my perspective, so I guess wait, yeah, that way I think like, yeah. So it's like you've got the E like this, and then you got this one. This one's the same one as this one. It's A, and then the more standard one, this direction is A, and then you've got the normal
I love it. So, in this linguistics podcast, we'll also be talking about Florence's amazing new book, Gender Fucking. But for the five people on Transfitter that aren't following you, who are you? What are you about?
I think you are grossly overestimating how many people follow me and follow what the heck I talk about,
I'm a Lobie.
but I'm Florence Ashley. I'm a trans femme academic, activist,
Mhm.
shit poster extraordinaire. Uh, I'm a I'm a professor of law and bioethics at the University of Alberta. Just finished my first year as a prof, and I
Mhm.
recently put out a book called "Gender Fucking: The Pleasures and Politics of Living in a Gendered Body."
Mhm.
Which is a sort of like I like to say depends on how you see it. Either I trick people into reading theory by sandwiching it in erotica, or I trick people into reading erotica by sandwiching it in theory. So it kind of depends which one you're more drawn to. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's kind of the idea.
And there's poetry, there's like erotic monster fucking. It's amazing. This book is so sad.
Yeah, there's
Mhm.
vampires, there's mermaids. And then people always ask me, like, is it based on real life? And I'm like, well, unfortunately, I did not get to fuck a vampire. Um,
Not yet.
Not yet. Uh, but everything else is accurate. It's just I just had to metaphorize certain things that uh,
Mhm.
narratively wouldn't have carried through quite well without adding that layer. But like, it's still just a slightly. It's still only a slight tweak from real life, frankly.
Mhm.
Um, obviously there's no actual vampire, but like the rest of it is accurate.
Mhm. But yeah, talking about gendered bodies. So as trans femmes, we love talking about our bodies, pregnancies. So I love the book and I love how raw it is. So could you take us through how you kind of first conceived of the book and how that changed through the process of writing it? And then the book was released in March. So like, how has the book kind of been taken up and how has that sort of changed your perception of the book?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a book that's been a long time coming. I've been
Mhm,
uh I think like let's see, like I think I like wrote the first I probably wrote the first chapter. Like I wrote the first chapters back when I was, I think, still in Montreal. So it
mm,
would have been like 2019 or so. And the first chapter I wrote was Vaginomancy. And
yeah.
I didn't know what the heck to do with it. I liked it, but I didn't know what the hell to do with it. And then later on, I wrote um, the first chapter, Sexually Transmissible Transitude, for the TSQ special issue on T for T, and
Mhm,
I didn't take it. So I decided, you know what? Like now I have like these two like essays that I don't really like know what to do with, and they have a similar vibe, and they seem to come from a similar place, like
mhm,
artistically, and in terms of pieces of literature. So I was like, what if I just like do an entire book in this style? And that's
mhm,
essentially what I did. And so it was really a like there was really multiple moments where I where different parts of the book came together. Um, and so like, so it's been an interesting process, but a lot of it is just
mhm.
like things that I had on my mind at any given point in time, and just needing to say something, and also knowing that a lot of people around me would relate and
Yeah.
would enjoy just feeling seen by the book. So uh that's been a lot of the response, is especially trans fans, but I
Mhm,
think like people more broadly have just like been feeling really seen by the entire book or parts of the book. And that's been really the primary response. And that's been really interesting and really heartening. Because that's kind of what you want to do with this sort of book. It's so personal,
mhm,
but you know, we're never, or at least I don't know, maybe others do, but like I'm never writing to be like, oh, I'm special, I'm different. Like I write because I'm not. I write because my
mhm,
experiences are really just a microcosm of the human experience. Like it is precisely because there's something so deeply unspecial about my own experiences that I write. If I was the only one who felt a certain way ever, then I don't know that I'd be writing, because I'd be like, well, I'm the only audience that's interested in this. But here it's precisely because it speaks to what others live through, and it doesn't have to mean that their experience, like what they actually live through, is the same in terms of like the sequence of events and things like that. But there are ways of feeling and relating to the world that are in many ways quite close to being universal, um,
mhm.
and that just really pervade human existence. And I think we like to see ourselves reflected. We like to know that we're not alone in feeling certain ways. And even if other people's experiences are exactly the same, it would be weird if everybody's experience was exactly the same. Like,
Mhm.
but sometimes there's still enough of a resonance that you feel seen in something that's not necessarily exactly what you've experienced, but still has certain resonances of it.
Yeah. Because I completely agree with all of that. What are, for on your end, what are some of these universals that you're thinking about?
That life
Maybe
is
your
messy.
universals. Mm-hmm.
That
Yes.
life is messy as fuck. That the way we relate to one another and to ourselves is messy, and it's not like it's something that the world and that we try to discipline all the time, but that attempt at discipline is always bound to fail. Our bodies are never going to do exactly what we want them to do. Our relationships aren't always going to go exactly the way we want them to. Nothing is an emotional binary. Like things aren't pure joy and pure sadness or anger or suffering. Most things, almost everything, is a mixture of many different feelings, and that's where the messiness comes in, but also part of the beauty of life. Frankly, if life was just like monotonously joyous, that would be boring as fuck.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, early on in the book, you say that perhaps the book is a love letter to messiness, and I completely agree. And there were I feel very, as a trans, I feel very seen by this book, but there were so many moments that it was like, and I didn't expect, but it's like, oh, this is kind of the standard trans biography, and then that you like subvert it or kind of like actually speak to a deeper truth and a deeper sort of complex, messy reality. And you do this in other parts of the book so beautifully in terms of kind of talking about trans femmes being human, and sometimes we do really bad things or just, you know, hurt people. But I could see other authors not, to be a trans woman saying this, to not be as brave and to not really talk about the messiness and fallibility of queer and trans life. So could you talk me through like kind of, I guess, your thought process creatively or even like morally in terms of choosing to embrace the messiness?
I mean, I think it goes back to the fact that like if we don't, then we're just not gonna serve ourselves well. Like the reality is like people are messy. So if you're the way you talk about people and if your politics can't acknowledge the fact that people are messy, then you're not gonna have a human politic or a human view of the world, and you're not gonna be able to actually serve people because people are messy. And so any politic that doesn't start from that doesn't, you know, begin with the starting point that people are messy is bound to fail, I think. And so, you know, embracing the messiness is just, you know, absolutely necessary. And in terms of standard trans biography, that's been an interesting thing navigating, because like it's something that feels really kind of exposed in the book, and the discomfort with like putting forward you know, what can be seen as like a surgery narrative. Because I'm like, ugh, this, you know, I hate surgery narratives. They're so voyeuristic, but I don't, like, also don't see it as a surgery narrative. Like the surgery is just kind of like the narrative backdrop of what I'm talking about. The surgery is ultimately like deeply unimportant to the book. What's important is the relationality, the relationship I have to my body, the relationship I have to others, and things like that. The, you know, like surgery is just like really just a backdrop. And like, you know, I say that as you know, having of course reread my book many times as I edited it, and you know, it's still speaking to me despite the fact that like surgery was a hell of a long time ago. And so, you know, I've changed, you know, my life has just changed a lot like since, just by virtue of like time passing being a thing. And so it's kind of interesting, like navigating my own feelings about the fact that like it can still be read as a surgery narrative by people who aren't picking up on what it's actually about. So it's kind of like, you know, it's interesting. And I mean, there is an actual chapter that's essentially just like a personal journal through like surgery, but it's also not at all about surgery, because it's like, I don't know if I have the book here actually.
Vaginomancy is definitely one of the standout chapters, which does, again, it can be seen as like a surgery narrative, but it's also very much not that, and it's very delightfully subversive.
I mean, I think the most surgery narrative one is the cutting table, I think. Like because it's
Mhm.
literally just like a journal. And I don't have the book here, but or wait, do I have it? And it's just in my place. No, I just don't have it. I don't know what happened with that book, but there's this like book by Samuel Beckett called Malon Meurt, um,
Mm.
which is just like this book that's like, frankly, it's as interesting and fascinating a book as it is deeply boring to read, because it's an entire novel, and it's got a good length to it. That's entirely written from like a hospice bed, unclear, with a narrator that's just like deeply confused about what's going on, why he's there, everything. And but the thing that carries through so much through that is the sense of the bizarreness of the world, of the mundane, just how weird just life is in
Mm.
general. And which makes sense. It's Beckett is an absurdist writer, and so it really uh it really like speaks to that. And that's something that I really had in mind. I was trying to conjure a little bit in that chapter, especially with like returning the gaze onto the like doctors, um which I think is important in context of just how much trans identity is medicalized, and how
Mhm.
doctors are often elevated into almost like godhood. And I'm just like, yeah, but also fuck them. um
Yeah.
like they can suck a cactus dick like Lacan. um
Yeah. I was gonna say. Mm.
and so so I was trying to really kind of like conjure that, and return back to awareness. And so I think there is that very much that kind of um, absurdist influence there. I mean, being a Frenchie and having kind of grown up being like a lot of our literature classes are like absurdist and literature and things like that. And that's something that I've done, like that I've read a lot. And so trying to do that and kind of really contest the power and like challenge the power of the medical establishment, which I think is also like a way of honoring and echoing Sandy Stone's, you know,
Course.
The Empire Strikes Back paper. So yeah, but then some people are still just probably going to read it as just like a straightforward surgery narrative, which I find, which is why I had the thing at the end where I do the kind of like the journal review thing. That's like obviously the narrator is the one who wrote
Yeah,
the fucking
that's
journal,
yeah.
but somehow,
Uh,
which like this kind of defiance of reason in writing the book review, which is itself very like um very inspired by what Borges does a lot, which he
mhm.
does these book reviews of books that don't exist. But also there's like almost an element of magical realism in the sheer rejection of the idea that it could be the narrator. And you're confronted with that sense of disjunction that doesn't involve, at least not clearly, doesn't involve magic, and so it's not really like magical realism in that sense, but does conjure, is meant to evoke the same kind of um not shock, but sort of like uh, almost a little bit like a shock. Like it's just like it's supposed to confront
Mhm.
you, and you're supposed to feel like you're supposed to be like, ah, that's kind of weird, like
Yeah.
uh, it's supposed to kind of trouble you a little bit, which I think like is what magical realism is kind of all about. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, so there's a lot of my thought around around that. And I think um, throwing back that lens, and it just, in many ways, I just think also that here, like the messiness of the trans experience, and it's not like capital T trans experience. I mean, just like a trans experience,
Mhm.
uh, is really helpful in kind of just like highlighting broader patterns in society, because like this aspect of like medical power, and then this aspect of like relationship to embodiment and stuff like that is something that's like pervades society, but we often don't think about, especially outside of like trans circles. And so it's kind of interesting to have a way of opening up those conversations, because like the thing about, like, for instance, the non-consensuality of embodiment that's throughout vaginomancy, I mean, that's not a trans thing. That's an everybody thing. But
Exactly.
but the fact that, like, but there was a confrontation with that fact that came with surgery, because most of the time we're just, because that non-consensuality of embodiment has been a fact of life for our entire life, we don't necessarily kind of notice it. It just like blends into the background as this sort of like natural assumption. And so, but having changes in that is, you know, is where you kind of like see it more. And of course, is also an experience that you're that is very becomes very visible in the narratives of disabled people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, there's so much, yeah, universal, yeah, just troubling of certain kind of expectations of trans people universally, or universal narratives, queer people. This book is so filled with iconic like one-liners, and Lacan can eat a cactus stick. That is very iconic. But if I may say, the line before that, or the lines before that, I find are also very iconic. You say, I do not care for accuracy nor faithfulness. Lacan can eat a cactus stick. And just that like assertion of like fuck giving like the standard trans narrative, like fuck kind of the linear, like cogent narrative of my of ontology, just rejecting that. I love it. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
you know, do whatever the fuck you want. Be gay, do crime, right? Like,
Exactly. Mhm.
yeah, I do like, there's a lot of funny ones. I know, I remember like the copy editor wrote a note in the book being like I know I'm not supposed to comment on like the substance of the book, but this quote just took me out of it. I was just like laughing so fucking hard, and it was the phraseologism my titties Vine reference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Which is like funny because like it's something that's probably not gonna um, a lot of people, a lot of the readership is probably not gonna pick up on that reference.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm sitting there, barbecue sauce on my titties. Um,
Yeah, the Zoomers know that Orange is the New Black.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know if they know Vine. Yeah. But yeah, it just, yeah, I have a little document of some of the ones that I like. I still think the pockets one is
Yeah.
where I'm just like, besides, we all know I pursued vaginoplasty because women's clothing has no pockets, and it was either that or learning sewing.
Mhm. Yeah, but no, I completely agree. Just the embrace of like the reality of our existence as trans femmes is like the absurdity of it, the mundanity of it. It's just, oh, so great.
Yeah.
Mhm. But this book, and very much so, this book is not just for trans folks, for trans femmes. It's also for everyone who has a body. And as a fellow body haver, I love how strongly and correctly you talk about the body as like a site of knowledge, and within that, the body or arousal and desire as like really critical sites of knowledge. So I think you really strongly argue for like the epistemological value of that. But I was just wondering to get personal, what are some things that arousal and desire have taught you?
See, my problem is that my brain has a decidedly presentist agenda, so I don't remember shit about the
Mm,
past. I don't know shit about the future, and so whenever I have to like reflect on things that I've learned and stuff like that, I'm always just like fully drawing a blank because I'm like, I don't fucking know. All I am is in the present. The past doesn't exist. It's all a lie. You know, but I think, you know, to me, like a result and desire and the body just like it it taught me like ways to care for myself, because like we
mhm,
often see this like split between, you know, the mind and the body, and kind of like tend to devalue the life of the body, but like the reality is like our minds are so impacted by our body and the way we relate to people, and the way that like the way that how our body changes our relationship to society. And and so kind of like learning that viscerally, but also like getting to carry that knowledge as my body changes in like different ways, because there's also like the process of aging and things like that, which also has its own body changes and like that. But also just like not taking shit from people helps, like and just kind of like listening to your body, because your body sometimes, tells you a lot of interesting stuff. I have a very complicated relationship to my body, especially as like a sensory machine, because like being autistic a lot of the time is just too much, frankly. And I'm just like who the fuck made it so that sleep still involves sensation? Like I just want a break. Like holy shit. Like what the fuck? So that's kind of like the kind of things that I think about. And when we're talking about like embodied autonomy, and we're talking about like our relationship to people, like it's all mediated through our body. And things like if I'm hungry, I have brain fog, so it's like directly impacting my mind in many ways. If I'm hungry, and we live in a world that a lot of time doesn't want to feed people, and so this is also something to think about, and like that interrelationship, and the fact that like we can just like sever out the body and be like, well, the body is its own thing, and everything else that we do is its other thing, and they're kind of like disconnected, and they're like, well, it's not. But we all kind of know that, but we also kind of, I feel, oftentimes pretend like we don't.
Oh, definitely. And I think that sort of sense really comes through in the A Law Clerk comes in Ottawa chapter.
Yeah, I wonder how the legal profession is vibing that one.
Yeah, which is very much and yeah, jump in at any time, as you're kind of obviously not first, but first engagement in the Supreme Court building, and really just a reflection and mediation on kind of like cis white guy epistemologies and sort of their privileging within this system.
And also trying to piss off William Rehnquist, because I mean it's kind of subtle, and it requires digging to like kind of notice the reference. But in the book, I pull out like in the chapter, I pause at a gold trim copy of Justice William Rehnquist, the Supreme Court, how it was and how it is. The first chapter of that book is titled "A Law Clerk Comes to Washington."
Oh,
that's why it's titled "A Law Clerk Comes in Ottawa." And it's a chapter about William Rehnquist's own experience when he was just out of law school clerking for the Supreme Court of the United States. And Rehnquist is also deeply conservative, and just a shitty dude. And so I like to think that he's really rolling over in his graves with this chapter. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. But I do wonder how the legal profession is feeling about it. I wonder what Supreme Court judges are feeling about it, if any of them has read it. I probably not, but you never know.
You never know.
I did have personal relationship with a number of them. Now less so now, but now that I'm like all the way out west and quite far from the court, it's been a hot minute since I've seen most of them. But yeah, but I do wonder sometimes.
I mean, we're recording this on June 1st, Pride Month, so maybe your book will be on a CBC listicle. We can only hope.
I wish. I doubt it. But I doubt it. Media has been ghosting this book a bit.
Which is unfortunately a wonderful transition, because Yeah, like the straight media, and then kind of norming legal professions, very very sexless, sex negative. That's true. But I'm a porn and sex work historian, and I read the iconic. I'm a bad queer theorist. I just read Lear Brasani's The Wreck from the Grave last year, and one of the interventions that it makes is just like talking about sex, talking about the materiality of sex and anal sex in the body, which made me really realize just how sexless, the sexlessness of queer and trans studies. Um, what do you think that is? Because I have my own fan theories, but like, why do you think queer and trans studies scholars aren't horny in their work?
I mean, I have many layers of ideas. One of them
Mm,
is like I think sometimes they are, right?
mhm.
Uh, Depends which work and stuff like that. But like, I'm thinking like notably like Gray Slavery, but also like other folks who have horny. I mean, Susan Stryker. I mean, I opened the book with talking about like Dungeon Intimacies by Susan Stryker, right?
Yeah.
And that's a horny, like that's horny. Um, so there are pockets of horniness, but obviously like academia doesn't like horny, and queer theory and trans theory are in academia. Um, then there's the fact that like we're so consistently sexualized that I think there's still a bit of that kind of reaction uh
Mhm.
response to it. But then there's also just like the tendency of queer and trans theory to just like over intellectualize and over abstract everything.
Mhm.
Um, which like is where I kind of like go back to uh, um, uh, Ian Elisante's Dear Trans Studies, Can You Do Love? Um,
Mhm.
which like kind of contests that aspect of trans studies and kind of how it's not centered on people a lot of the time. Like trans and queer has become an analytic that has whereby now it's like there's a lot of like queer and trans studies that's happening that doesn't have queer and trans people, and there's a space of course for doing queer and trans studies without queer and trans people, but like you would think that it would be kind of like central, and that it would be like
You would think.
first and foremost about queer and trans people, and then try to pull out broader truths from that. But there's a tendency to like over abstract it, and I think like that over abstraction is like inevitably leads to a certain desexualization, right? And
Mhm.
that goes back to this idea of kind of the mind body split, and sex and arousal is in the body, and well, abstraction is the life of the mind. Abstraction is like the exact opposite of embodiment, despite the fact that like a lot of them are going to use words like embodiment. But even then the word embodiment becomes an abstract referent to for something that's much more visceral for most people. So I think like a lot of it is just the nature and reality of like one, academia, but two, like the genealogy of queer and trans theory in continental postmodern philosophy. Um, and I personally, I find that part of it is the worst part of it. I think there's a lot of important stuff from continental philosophy in postmodern thought, and by virtue of that, in queer and trans studies, there's just so much amazing stuff. But the the sheer level of abstraction is something that I often kind of dislike personally, and that I find moves us away from the human of the humanities, right? And so, and so yeah, it's a part. So I guess it's a mixed response. I have various theories of why that is, but there's also the question of like how much is that actually true? Um,
Oh, sure.
and and also especially if we expand our thought of what counts as queer and trans theory outside of like peer-reviewed publications, which are
Oh,
of
yeah.
course going to be editors who are clutching their pearls and making you take away stuff. There's like I published this gender identity paper in Mind
Mhm.
like last year or something like that, and they made me remove footnotes because thought they were too sexually crude. And I'm just like, okay, well, I mean, I'm putting them back into another paper, but uh, there's also that dynamic where like the editors who are cis by and large don't want
Mhm.
you to have that stuff. So there's also like that aspect of like cisgender mediation, that where like in effect cis people by and large get to decide what trans and queer scholars are allowed to write. You know, so we've got a bunch of like cis heads deciding what queer and trans study gets to be, and in a way that's often really under-examined because it like it's kind of hidden, right? Because if it's rejected, you can always like try to put it somewhere else. But you know, if your papers that have more sexual elements keep on getting rejected, at some point you're just gonna like bite the bullet and you're just gonna like, you know, give up. You're gonna be like, okay, next paper maybe I won't put as much sex in it because it's a pain in the ass and I need to get tenure, so I need to publish. You know, publish or perish. And if I keep getting rejections, then it's gonna be perish, not publish. So so yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't, you know, I'm not blaming queer and trans theorists for that, or at least not more than just a little bit.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's complicated. Everything is complicated. And I mean, it's frankly, it's weird. Like, I wrote this book while I was a student, right? The totality of this book was written before I became a professor. And you know, the vibe of having this book out in the world as a professor is very, very different than the imagined vibe of having it out as a graduate student, right? Because you know, there is that element of I have students, some of whom may or may not sexualize me, and I'm not comfortable with my students sexualizing me, right? The model has been, if you read, and I just like don't talk about the book at my faculty, like with my colleagues, yes, but like not when students are around. And the model, because I'm 100% convinced that a number of my students have read it. It's just inevitable, but nobody has mentioned it to me yet, and I'm quite grateful for that. And that's the way I prefer it. We're just gonna collectively pretend the book doesn't exist, and you know, if you know, if we talk in like 5 years, once you made partner at a firm, maybe we can talk about it. But for now, we're not talking about it because I don't need the, you know, the prospect of like students sexualizing me, which is like a struggle when you're a trans femme professor. I mean, you get all the like student feedback that like just student evaluations are very sexualizing, like commenting on your appearance, commenting on like, I had comments on the fact that I don't wear bras, and I was like, how the fuck is that an appropriate thing to comment on in your student evaluations? Why the fuck is that any of your business? And also, my grandma didn't go on the fucking street and burn her fucking bra so that like fucking decades and decades later, you could write in my goddamn student evaluations a complaint about me not wearing a bra.
Yeah, which I think just, yeah, again, speaks to sort of, I don't know, kind of, it speaks to like I think about this in relation because I love mess. Like, I love talking about complicated narratives. And on the one end, I love doing that. My primary audience is like other trans people, other trans femmes. And then I can see how that complexity, that messiness can also be weaponized by like what is the dominant groups in societies too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, another thing you notice as you get more, you know, as you build a certain profile in academia is like, some people don't have great boundaries. You know, and like, so there's a certain amount of like, you know, people like fawning or not necessarily always being kind of appropriate towards you. And I don't mean, you know, people more senior. That's also a thing, but it's a different thing than what I'm trying to talk about. I'm talking much more about like people who are junior who look up to you and don't necessarily have a sense of like social, like of your boundaries and what's social and like socially appropriate. And like sometimes you're just like a little bit uncomfortable. You're just like, like, you don't need to tell me this, you know. So there's also that aspect that like happens, especially when you publish the sort of work that I do is like, and I'm also sympathetic to the fact that like it's just really hard to know where the lines are. Being
Mhm.
autistic, as I mentioned, is like that's something that I've struggled with all of my life. Uh, in terms of like what is socially appropriate and stuff like that. So I fully, I get that, but you know, being on this receiving end does still mean that like there are going to be uncomfortable moments.
Mhm. Yeah, a great example I found is when you taught the case Quebec, the Engelsberger, and you taught it. Let me just read from the book. So I taught in boots and lace panties. 3 students wrote reflection papers on my tits. 2 good and 1 by a man. I can't
Yeah, that
lie.
was an interesting experience. That was during my master's. Um,
Mm.
and a dream of mine forever has been to actually um, give a topless talk at Harvard, but I don't think it's ever going to happen now because I'm not comfortable doing topless talks in environments that have students. And well, Harvard is an academic institution. So if I give any more topless talks, it will be at, like more like art event or whatever, where it is not an academic environment and not an environment when there are students around. Uh, I tried to get it I tried to get my Harvard toplessness thing done before I, graduated when I was still a student, but unfortunately, especially with uh, the pandemic, it has unfortunately not worked out. But yeah, and that was an interesting experience. What was also particularly fascinating is the next day after that, I was off to Ottawa to receive a really prestigious kind of mid-career award in front of most in front of like the top end of the legal profession, including multiple Supreme Court justices. Um, so it was just it's a very interesting phenomenon of like doing that the one day and then the next day I'm like, you know, all dressed up at this like incredibly, you know, fancy, pompous dinner. Uh, and getting to like give a little speech in front of like judges and shit. And the day before, I was, tits out, talking about sexual morality in early trans jurisprudence in Canada.
I feel like as a trans scholar, as a trans studies scholar too, it's so full of such moments. Just the other day, I was listening and taking very detailed notes on the semiotics of some 1970s transvestite forced feminization audio cassettes, and then a few hours later, writing highly precise and proper grant applications and talking about ontologies. And,
Oh, fuck
yes,
grants.
yes, but I like mine. Um, yeah, so what I love is that we're clearing categories because this is an academic book, but also like a non-academic book in some elements. And I'm thinking about this book in relation to other books or other texts that kind of do that, like the film Framing Agnes, or my favorite zine, Fucking Trans Woman by Mira Bellwether, rest in peace. And particularly is how they kind of become community texts or are community texts, and trans communities take them up, they remix them. Of course, they do discourse about them. And in talking about how you envisioned gender fucking, you kind of filled the book with so much transformative potential. So, what are some of the ways that you've seen trans people or just people in general kind of take up your book? So what have been some of these sort of transformative potentialities that you anticipated and ones that you did that are kind of pleasant surprises?
I mean, frankly, I don't know that this, I don't know that this is, in line with fucking trans women yet or anything. Also, really missing Mara right now, thinking about
Yes.
that, thinking about her zine and thinking about her. I think first, it's really early to know how the book's going to get um, taken up, and there's always this ever-present fear that's just going to fade into obscurity, not because people don't like it, but because it's been just really hard to get it on people's radar. You know, like especially like in today's world where like the media is ghosting, but the social media algorithms are all like fucked. And so it's making it like extremely difficult to actually like spread the word about the book, because like I have like what you know, on Twitter I have like 38,000 followers, but you know, I can barely get like 100 retweets on you know my posts about the book that do better, you know. So and so there is that, you know, that sadness about just like how difficult it is to get like books in the hands of people that want them, and I think is you know, speaks to a broader problem within the publishing world
Absolutely.
nowadays. I'm very curious to see the ways in which the book is gonna, you know, get picked up. I know people are really liking the idea of like palliative activism towards the end, and it's a really complicated and tense one, especially like I've been thinking about it a lot in like the current moment, because you've got also you also got the kind of like capitalist realism critique of like of hopelessness as, you know, capitalism telling you that it's hopeless, and then at the same time you're like, yeah, but like, you know, at the end of the day there's still going to be people who are hopeless, like who feel hopeless. And so and the hope is that palliative activism will be able to help keep these people engaged in the struggle and in resistance and in kind of radical challenge to the system, despite them not having hope. But it's a complicated, you know, thing to navigate and feel about, and also engages with like a lot of like climate fatalism and a lot of these like complicated feelings, how we're just like wish we all like, I mean, you know, like, a lot of people still have hope, but like a lot of us who don't have hope like wish we did, you know. Wish we
could you explain palliative activism? Because as someone who I try to live by hope as a discipline, I love the concept of palliative activism, and I love how uncomfortable it made me too.
Yeah, so the idea of like palliative activism is really about seeing our work and our resistance as a palliative endeavor. Basically, like it's to make the world as comfortable and as filled with love and joy as we possibly can on the way to the climate apocalypse. So, you know, like so it's like, you know, we're fucked because even if, you know, even if we're not quite there yet, the way that systems of power have been configured and have honed their ability to suppress any challenge to power means that by the time we're able to actually erect a genuine challenge to power, it's going to be too late. But we can't just give up. We can't just be like, okay, well, fuck it, or like be accelerationists, or, you know, like we can't just do that. Now you're
back to raging against the dying of the light.
Yes. So what was I saying when it cut on your end?
Yeah, just talking about, and I completely agree. But then for me, there's this certain I'm Delulu, the refusal of reality in terms of the earth is fucked. These systems of capital are incredibly powerful, but we still have to try. I think is where
I mean, for one, like go ahead. Like I'm not here.
Oh no, and that's not and that is the
I'm not here to you know, like I'm not here trying to take away anybody's hope. You know, like if people can have hope, have hope. Like it's like it's not like I wish I could have hope. Like, as I say, if you're still capable of hope, then hope. I envy you. You know, but like an important thing I was trying to really stress with this idea of like palliative activism is like it's not an accelerationist thesis. It's not a like I don't want people to give up. I don't want people to be like, okay, well, let's accelerate our downfall as a species or whatever, because like there are real people that have very real suffering now and in the near future, and so we have to do everything we possibly can to make life as livable and as happy as we possibly can, and that means keeping up the struggle. It does, I think, relieve a bit of the pressure, because there's this kind of like with kind of revolutionary hope, there's a bit of this kind of life or death aspect to it, where like if you don't succeed, then so you have to do everything you possibly can to succeed, even if it's unkind, unjust, and brings a lot of suffering of its own. And we see that, I think, a lot in social justice circles, where we're just kind of shitty towards one another a lot of the time. And so in many ways, the main difference between palliative activism and just kind of revolutionary activism, or kind of quote unquote regular revolutionary activism, is really this commitment to kindness, which is not a commitment to niceness. It's a different thing. But it's still, I still see it as revolutionary in the sense that like you're still doing a lot of the same things that you would in the hopes of a revolution. You're still trying to radically change the system in order to make it more livable, but you're also starting from this mindset of like, but maybe it's not possible. So like, there's kind of this kind of, I guess, harm reduction philosophy bundled up with it.
Yeah, but a revolutionary harm reductionist one, not a harm reductionist model that is ultimately
not the same. Not like neoliberal reformists, like real like harm reduction is like this recognition of like revolution is what we want, but insofar as it might not be fully attainable, like maybe we should do what we can. And what this notably rejects is like kind of accelerationism, right? Like which you see a lot in some leftist sphere, which is like, well, we'll just like let all the injustices be in the world because it'll make us get to the revolution faster. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't have hope for the revolution coming, then like maybe let's not do that. Let's still work towards the revolution, but let's not put all of our eggs in that basket and let people suffer in the meantime. Like, because there are real people right now suffering, and we don't want them, well, we shouldn't want them to be suffering, and we should do all we can to prevent that.
Yeah, that's always been a real sticking point for me with the kind of Leninist notion of accelerationism, where if the contradictions of capitalism are increased, aka there's more suffering, it'll lead to radicalization. One, hopefully it's the good radicalization, am I right? But two, like there's still real people that are being hurt by these contradictions of capitalism, and typically the people making the accelerationist arguments are usually not on the front line, like they're not as marginalized as the ones that would be directly harmed by this.
Yeah, I mean, and in interesting ways, it just like goes back to like these conversations that leftists/communists have been having since literally forever, because this is also partly this is also a little bit of a rehash between like Trotskyism and Stalinism, right? Like not exactly, but also a little bit. And so yeah, it's interesting. And like I'm not suggesting that I have the answer, nor am I suggesting that like my theorization of palliative activism has to be the one definite for all and that it's complete and perfect and whatever. Like no, it's I'm trying to open a conversation. The entire book is not answering anything. The entire book is about not giving answers. It's just making you think and feel things, and hopefully give a bit of clarity so that we can all each figure out our own answers for ourselves. But I'm not telling people shit. I'm not, people do like palliative activism is a like this is what I'm doing. You know, if you follow, if that's helpful to you, that's helpful to you. If it's not, maybe you'll hate it, and maybe hating it is what's gonna help us find a new way forward. You know, maybe people are gonna hate it so much that they'll find a new alternative that is better, and that maybe I'll even like better. You know, who knows? I'm not, you know, I'm not committing to shit for the rest of my life anyway.
I completely agree. And this reminds me of one of my favorite theorists, of course, Andrea Long Chu. I'm going to mention in any interview with another trans person. But one of the interventions she makes in after trans studies is that, yeah, like trans studies theorists, like we need to fight more. We need more polemics that people can agree with vehemently or disagree vehemently, because that ultimately, through more discourse, you know, we'll get to closer perhaps to some partial answers.
Oh yeah, Andrea Long Chu writing a devastating review of my book is kind of a dream. It's probably not gonna happen, but it is my dream.
Yeah, I mean, again, elements of your book reminded me a lot of different things that Andrea Long Chu has read. I mean, I'm gonna butcher the title, but yeah, like My Vagina Will Make Me Happy definitely lines up with some of the elements of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I still don't like that essay, but mostly I just don't like that it was in the New York Times. This is like it was just that paper that was just like, this is an intra-community conversation that we're not putting on the front page of the New York Times, where a bunch of cis people are going to misinterpret it. That's more what I disliked about that essay, but more than the essay itself. You know, but yeah, I mean, my coup de cœur Andrea Long Chu is still always and forever will be on liking women.
Of course, iconic.
Yeah, that's kind of the classic. I mean, that and the really brutal Joey Soloway takedown. That's where I was like, I want somebody to be this mean to me.
But I guess not to end with meanness, you know, ending on the positive. And here's another touchstone for me. As people are always saying, Jules Gill Peterson wrote a great article. So in this case, it's an article called The Little Yellow Book, or Does Trans Studies Care? So she talks about many things, but Bill Malentino's great book, Trans Care, and how, you know, a trans academic, but someone who's also very much in community, wrote a book that's small, cheap, and embodies, much like this mix of sort of trans studies and theory, but also trans community vernaculars and great one-liners. I feel the exact same way about your book. So I'm thinking about other recent-ish trans texts, like Trans Care, of course, if I may say, I Hope We Choose Love, and Jamie Hood's How to Be a Good Girl, that blends sort of modes of fiction with diary, with theory, and like obviously discourse. So as someone who is very much a scholar, but also like very much in community on those trans Twitter streets, was the style of the book sort of deliberate in terms of sort of like, you know, queering genres and grammars?
Yes and no. I think I think there's something extremely fitting about playing with genre, and also in my native French, it's the same word, right? Genre and genre is the same word, and the grammatical gender is grammatical genre. So for me, these are all the same. Like these are all like it's the same word and just kind of different variants of the idea. You have the human gender, you have the gender of text, and you have the gender of like linguistics, but it's all gender. They're just the gender of different things. And in many ways, I mean, I didn't approach this thinking about with that in mind. In fact, when I was writing it, it was itself a callback / inspiration, inspired by something I've written back in CEGEP long before I came out as trans. like probably around 2010, 2010, 2011, something like that. And which was itself more inspired by like existentialists and by Denis Laferrière, who is this writer based in Montreal, who is now on the Académie Française. I hate the Académie Française, but he's a Haitian Canadian, Haitian Quebecer novelist. And so there's a huge inspiration of that because in his book there's a lot of sex, plainly, but also sex and thinking. In like one of his in like some of his books, like it's all about basically sexcapades by somebody who's really into philosophy. And then so in many ways, like I feel like my book is just like quintessentially French, and I just happen to write it in English. And because and in that way, it gets a very different feel. It has its own very different feel, and also it gets read as a much more academic book than it's intended to be. And I think part of that is because France and the French language has much more of a tradition of intellectual nonfiction that is not meant for academic audiences. Like and even like the kind of academics like Camus, like Camus like gets read like so much by non-academics and writes novels and everything, and then the same thing for Sartre. I hate Sartre, but sometimes you gotta and so in many ways, like that's really where it sort of came from. It came from like really earlier writing that I did, and that I thought was just a style that really worked well here. But maybe that was just an egg moment. But and so yeah, like, and I'm already unbound by genre and discipline so much in my own work. Like I write very differently than is typical in my field of studies. I also write across tons of different fields, and also write to very different audiences across my work. And so this, this idea of like not keeping to one thing and kind of merging different things, and is really just just more of a literary echo of my transdisciplinarity as a scholar, as an academic. But it is interesting because, and I mean, maybe part of it is because I called it academic smut, which, but also, I mean, because I think people are reading academic smut with the emphasis on academic. I read it with the emphasis on smut. And so to me, it's not an academic book. It's literary nonfiction. It's and it's meant to be a broad audience, or it's not meant to be a book read primarily by academic. I don't have footnotes, or endnotes, and I also do the French thing where you're just supposed to get the reference, which is again a very distinctly French thing. French writers do that a lot. They're not going to tell you what the reference is. You're supposed to just get it, which I feel less bad about in a literary book, because they're just the Easter eggs to find, where you're just like rereading multiple times and you're picking up on new stuff. Like there's a lot of very layered references that that I suspect nobody's ever gonna get because they're just cryptic, but they're still fun enough. It's fun to know that they're there as the author. So yeah, so in a way, the style of the book is deliberate, but I think it's almost more deliberately French than deliberately queer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I consider my academic career incredibly masturbatory, because I wrote a journal article on porn, historical porn from the 70s, but I wanted to include a reference to Natalie Mars. It was like very much contemporary porn stuff. So I felt great that I was able to do that.
Yeah. Also,
Mhm.
in terms of the intellectual masturbation, there was also a bit of a um, might remember some years ago there was a bit of a tiff in the trans academic world around TSQ being around a lot of people feeling like they weren't really like welcome in the TSQ world.
Mhm.
And there's a sense that like it was perhaps a bit too abstract in certain ways. And um, I had mentioned in like a tweet, I called it intellectual masturbation, and some people got very angry at me for that. And I was like, well, first of all, like I call my own work intellectual masturbation. It's just that the issue is when all you're doing is intellectual masturbation. Sometimes that can become a problem. Uh, but there is definitely a lot of value in point to intellectual masturbation, and I mean, this book is basically that, in perhaps a little bit more literal a sense than some other, but also do a lot of the more classically intellectual masturbatory work. And so yeah, that was also a little bit for around the choice of the term, is that it also had this um, also call back to like my thinking about trans studies and its abstraction and stuff like that. So yeah, and I don't know, I think we're just at a really great time uh for kind of trans literature and the sort of like mm, the sort of like nonfiction writing that's not just to be read by academics.
Yeah.
um like I think it's just a really great time for that. And it's really, yeah, it's been really enjoyable. I feel like, I mean, it's a sad thing, but I feel like whenever the world sucks, there's just such great writing that gets done, and it's kind of sad, but I guess it's a bit of a silver lining. I guess it makes the bad feel a little bit less bad, and I'm quite grateful for that.
Yeah. The earth is on fire, but so is the trans literary scene.
It is on fire. The world is on fire, but suck dick, have a drink, and have fun.
I love it. I mean, I feel like I want to end it there, but I mean, is there anything else you want folks to know about the book?
Nah, I'm good. Check the book out. Check the book out. You can easily find places to buy it.
Mhm. I
And
was gonna include, I'm gonna include the Google Doc of like where you can buy it that you like made it because I haven't seen it. Okay,
sounds good.
perfect.
And yeah, tell me, and I'm speaking to the audience with this, but like, tell me what you think about the book. I love receiving. I love when people tag me on their reflections on social media or just like DM me their thoughts. I think it's been really fun seeing how people are thinking and engaging with the book, and it makes it much more lively as a writer. It's especially when in the context of like, I'm not getting New York Times reviews, but I am getting DM reviews. So and the DM reviews really do feel it's really nice. It's really nice to also get to like talk to the people like with their thoughts and get to have that back and forth that's initiated by the book. So yeah,
Wow, wonderful. Perfect. Thank you so much for talking with me.
totally.
Um,
All right. Well, have a great rest of the day. And now I'm going to go buy coffee and play Diablo 4.
I love that.